Good afternoon, friends and family. Today we have one of my favorite stories. I know that I say it a lot, but this story I like it because it shows up in the other synoptic gospels. And when you dissect this story from the aspect of the other gospels, the story kind of seems to take a little bit of changes here and there. But it's the story of the feeding of the 5,000 men. That they didn't count the women and children for whatever reason they didn't. But today we have Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 13. The funny thing is about this story is when I sit here and I think about it and I try to create some type of imagery of what is going on, I think about, and oftentimes it's the man that's too prideful, that the man that doesn't want to make too many grocery trips and puts all the grocery bags all over their arms, and then they carry as many grocery bags as they possibly can into the house, so that way they only have to make one trip. And then the next day the man complains about how smashed the bread is, but nonetheless they made that trip and they only had to make one trip. And I'll admit, I've been that man before, and sometimes I've even seen my kids try to do it now, where they try to carry too much stuff to show off how strong they actually are. And whenever I read this story, I think about that because they have these bushels that are now overflowing, and they only went out there with very little. So Mark's perspective of the feeding of the 5,000. In those days when there was again a great crowd without anything to eat, he called his disciples and said to them, I have compassion for the crowd, because they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from a great distance. His disciples replied, How can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? He asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said, 7. Then he ordered the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute. And they distributed them to the crowd. They had also a few small fish, and after blessing them, he ordered that these too should be distributed. They ate and were filled, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. Now there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away, and immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to argue with them, asking him for a sign from heaven to test them. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, he went across to the other side. Now there's 3 different theories about this story. The first theory is that Christ blessed the bread, and there became more bread, and there became more fish. Another theory is that once Christ became generous, other people became generous, and people gave up what they had in order to feed other people, and a sense of community happened. Now the third part could be that these people were not as hungry as they thought they were, or that this little piece of bread filled them to an expanded understanding, and it goes back to the analogy that Christ will bring the bread that fills us beyond our own understanding, and that will feed us and take care of us beyond our own understanding. So this little piece of bread filled them up completely, and a little piece of fish filled them up completely. But it doesn't matter which theory you really look at. The main principle of this story is that God is going to take care of us. That we don't need a miraculous sign, that we don't need these miraculous things to happen. God is constantly at work in this world. And that God can do magnificent things, regardless of if God is multiplying fish and bread, or teaching people to be generous to one another, or filling us to the ability that we didn't think we could be full before by eating such a little amount. We don't need to go back to God in the second part of this scripture and ask for God for a sign, because we already have signs around us of God's love for us. And the crazy thing about it is, we don't deserve God's love because we've ruined what God has created for us. But yet, God still loves us. God never forsakes us. God never leaves us. And so we have this beautiful story of these people that are being hungry, and it even says in verse 2 that I have compassion for the crowd because they have been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. Christ shares the compassion that God has for us today. The same compassion that God had for those people then and Christ had for those people then, God still has that same compassion and love for us today. I encourage you today to be in prayer for our local school districts as they're going through a really tough time. An unforeseen circumstance from this shutdown to me was the fact that these schools were going to lose so much money. And people are going to be unemployed because of that. And I knew unemployment was going to exist, but I didn't really think that it was going to affect our schools. And our administrations are out there making really tough decisions, and school is going to look drastically different than it did last year. And even after the pandemic, it's going to be a new style of school all over again. So I ask that you be in prayer and be in compassion for our teachers, for administration over top of our teachers, the bus drivers, the aides, all of the people that make the ability to be able to teach our kids work. To share compassion with them in their time of need, just like Christ shared his compassion with these people that were following him for 3 days and their time of need. Blessings to you all.